Good morning. This is part two of Libya and Egypt, the two last countries that we need to cover in chapter 21. Go back over here. Yesterday we left off talking about the Nile River, the longest river in the world, over 4,000 miles long as it is from Atlanta to Fairbanks, Alaska. Just an enormously long river, goes down into the country of Tanzania before you find its source. Okay, so we're going to talk today about a couple of different things around the Nile River, and I don't think we have much more. We're going to talk about the pyramids a little bit too. All right, so it won't be too long. The rural farmers here are called the fellahin. The fellahin live in houses built out of sun-dried bricks. They farm in this area of the Nile River. They work their fields with wooden plows pulled by buffalo. They do not have adequate health care. The sanitation and disease is very bad in the area, but it is what they have, and they do the best they can with it. So up near the Aswan High Dam, down all the way to just above the Nile Delta, is called Upper Egypt because it's a higher elevation. And then when you get into the Nile Delta, which seems crazy to call it that, but to call it Lower Egypt because it's actually the farthest north you can get. But the Nile River does flow to the north instead of to the south like we would like to think. There's only, I think, one river in all of the United States that flows from the south to the north, and that's the St. Johns River in Florida. Most rivers do flow from north to south or from east to west, west to east. They flow downhill, and that's what the Nile does. It flows downhill. So it starts up in the mountains, and to flow downhill, it has to flow north. Okay. This is the city of Alexandria. Of course, it is right on the Mediterranean coast. It was founded by Alexander the Great. Near the mouth of the delta. He built it here. Also, he built the lighthouse called, I got to look up the name. Hold on here just a minute. The lighthouse was called Pharos. It was one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. He also built a library here in Alexandria that had no comparison in all of the world. The library at Alexandria housed some of the oldest manuscripts that the world had ever known, and it has been lost to civilization. Muslim conquerors moved into the capital and took it from the Greeks. Alexander wasn't really a Greek. He was really cannot remember the name. He was from a different country, not the Greeks, but he loved Greece, so we call it Greek. Anyway, Muslim conquerors moved to the capital from Alexandria to Cairo, near the start of the Delta. And Cairo today, desert covers the rest of Egypt. Cairo today has a lot of tourism because they are still the home of the pyramids. Each pharaoh of Egypt had a pyramid. That was where he was buried. When the pharaoh died, the Egyptians put the mummified body in the tomb along with that particular pharaoh's valuables. Maybe it was jewelry, maybe it was hunting equipment, probably all of those. Furniture, musical instruments, and food. They had to take enough food with them into the afterlife to keep them from starving. There is approximately 60 pyramids around Cairo, and many more throughout the rest of the nation. They're some of the oldest man-made structures in the world. The most famous of these are at Giza. I'm going to put these notes up here and we'll talk about them in a minute. The pyramids at Giza include Khufu, Menkaure, and Khafra. The pyramid at Khufu dates to 2600 BC. It is the tallest pyramid in the world. It is 481 feet high. If you figure a standard house has a ceiling of 9 to 10 stories, you're talking 48, 50 stories tall building. There's also, of course, the Sphinx that's at Giza as well, and it is 66 feet high. The Pyramid of Khufu is 13 square acres or 7 city blocks. Each side is 745 feet long, and their right angles at the base are very accurate, and engineers still can't figure out why or how they're so accurate. Um, the pyramid is composed of 2 million blocks of stones. Many of them weigh 2.5 tons, but some of them weigh as much as 9 tons. Inside, there's 2 main passageways. The upper passageway leads to the Queen's Chamber and then to the King's Chamber. And I guess the other one maybe leads to the storage area to store all of his stuff. The laborers who built the elaborate tombs for the pharaoh, because they worshiped the pharaohs as gods, do not think that the Israelites built the pyramids. We know that they made the bricks. We do not know that they built the actual pyramids. They may have had something to do with it, but they didn't necessarily build the pyramids themselves. That was a different era. And we'll get into that in world history. According to Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, 100,000 men worked on the pyramid at Khufu for 20 years to finish it. But let's move on. The Western Desert, or the Libyan Desert, is a low plateau that covers 2/3 of Egypt. The eastern part of the desert is the eastern part of the Nile, east of the Nile, between the Nile and the Red Sea, is mountainous. It's still desert, but it's mountainous. The western part is just a low plateau, and it's called the Qattara Depression there as well, that drops to 436 feet below sea level. So it's very, very low. There's talk now of changing it into a lake, building a dam around the Nile to force that to flood. That could really change a lot of things for Egypt, but it's a very expensive and costly project. Okay, so we talked yesterday a little bit about the Coptic Christians. They do have quite a large minority that live in the country that are Coptic Christian. And as I told you yesterday, it's very ritualistic, very traditional, very formal, similar to Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, like the Greeks or Russians. Okay, this area of Egypt is called the Sinai Peninsula. This is that triangle that juts down out to the right side of the continent of Africa. And while most of Egypt lies on the African continent, the Sinai Peninsula pictured here is actually part of Asia. It is not part of Africa. Notice on the far left side, almost off your screen, how there's water as you follow the Red Sea northward. We're going to talk about that next. That is called the Gulf of Suez, that area there. And that is where the Suez Canal is, that connects the Mediterranean Sea to the far north with the Red Sea, allowing ships to leave Italy, supposedly, and go towards India without going all the way around Africa. So it is divided from African Egypt by that Isthmus of Suez. That's the land between the Gulf of Suez and the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, this is another picture of the Suez Canal that cuts through that isthmus and connects the two bodies of water. And you see that from the deck of an aircraft carrier here. And that is all I have. One thing I wanted to ask you about before we finish our chapters of Africa is, why has the African continent gone so long without major improvements? Why is the continent filled with so many third world countries that don't have adequate sanitation, adequate nutrition, and education to promote growth and democracy among their people? And the answer to that question is varied. Some people would say that they've brought it on themselves by the fighting that goes on the continent. And certainly that plays a role. But that's not all. Some of it is that they've been mistreated by their European conquerors. We studied that, and we'll study it more as we get into other sections of history, world history, um, in 10th grade. But there's also part of it is just natural causes. The continent itself is very poor. While it has an abundance of natural resources, it also has poor soil all the way across the northern continent, where the northern part of the continent where the Sahara Desert is. And even where the rainforests are, the soil is not set up to produce large crops and thereby combat malnutrition among the people. Um, they've had invasions, they've had that, and of course, our own sinful nature goes against being able to conquer that sinful nature enough to set up a stable government. Also works against the continent as well. Um, a beautiful continent, but nevertheless one that still needs much work to bring it into the modern centuries. Tomorrow we will move on to Australia and New Zealand, and I look forward to seeing you then and discussing that with you. Have a good day.